Imagine waking up one morning to find your entire property surrounded by a fence you never asked for. Your freedom, your land, your very home, cut off by people who claim to know what's best. That's exactly what happened to a man living peacefully in a quiet American community, and what followed would shock everyone. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more unbelievable stories, and drop a comment below if you think this could happen to anyone. Now, let's get into it. It all started on a sunny morning in rural America. The birds were chirping, the wind was gentle, and life was peaceful for Jonathan, a proud homeowner who had just purchased his dream property. He wasn't rich or famous, just a hard-working man who loved his land, his privacy, and his independence. Jonathan's property was more than just land. It was a symbol of freedom. Rolling pastures, a small barn, and a clear view of the horizon. This was his sanctuary. But the quiet life he loved was about to collide with something he never imagined. A homeowners association, or HOA, that decided they had the authority to control everything, including his property. The first sign of trouble came with a letter, official-looking, stamped with a logo that carried authority. It read like any typical HOA communication. But the words inside made Jonathan's blood run cold. Your property borders must comply with HOA regulations. The fence you built is in violation and must be removed immediately. Jonathan scratched his head. Fence? What fence? His land had no fence, not yet. And yet, here they were, accusing him of breaking rules he didn't even know existed. At first, he tried to reason. He emailed, called, and even visited the HOA office to explain. Surely they'd understand. He had purchased his land legally, paid his taxes, and followed every rule. But the HOA wasn't interested in reason. Their response was cold, calculated, and surprisingly aggressive. Weeks passed, and things escalated. Without warning, heavy machinery arrived at the property line. Dozers and trucks, hired by the HOA, started erecting a massive fence across Jonathan's land. His property was no longer open and free. It was boxed in, sectioned off by metal bars and sharp warnings. Jonathan was stunned. "This is my land," he yelled. "You have no right." But no one listened. The HOA had the power, the lawyers, and most importantly, a sense of entitlement that seemed unshakable. He decided that if they were going to play dirty, he had to fight smarter. Jonathan spent nights researching property laws, HOA agreements, and even local ordinances. He realized the fence was not only morally wrong, it was legally questionable. He wasn't alone. Neighbors whispered about similar abuses, quietly afraid of retaliation. Jonathan knew he couldn't back down. He started documenting everything: photos, videos, letters, timestamps. Every action of the HOA was recorded meticulously. And then he made a bold move that would change the entire game. He purchased the adjacent property, the only plot that had the legal access point to the fence. With this new purchase, he held the key, the literal and legal access to the section the HOA had tried to control. The irony wasn't lost on him. The people who thought they could control him now depended on his goodwill to even enter the fenced area. But Jonathan wasn't cruel. He was strategic. He didn't block access entirely. Instead, he leveraged the situation to demand accountability. Suddenly, the tables had turned. The HOA, which once acted with unchecked authority, now faced a homeowner who understood both the law and the power of patience, persistence, and documentation. This confrontation wasn't just about a fence. It was about respect, fairness, and the principle that no one, no matter how organized or seemingly powerful, can trample on someone else's rights without consequences. And the story spread. Social media picked it up. Local news covered it. People from all over America were talking about a man who stood up to an overreaching HOA, not with violence, but with intelligence, strategy, and unwavering determination. Jonathan became a symbol of resistance. He showed that courage isn't always loud or aggressive. It's calculated, smart, and relentless. And for many, his story was a reminder. Knowing your rights and standing up for them can change the course of events, even against overwhelming odds. But the fight wasn't over. Every day brought new challenges: lawyers sending letters, HOA board members attempting to intimidate, neighbors whispering and wondering what might happen next. Each obstacle only strengthened Jonathan's resolve. By now, the property, that was once silently peaceful, had become the stage for a battle between authority and justice. And Jonathan? He was ready for it. He knew that every move mattered, every detail counted, and the world was watching. The story of this man and his fence is not just a tale of property disputes. It's a lesson in resilience, strategy, and the power of one individual to hold their ground against those who think they're untouchable. And as the sun set over the rolling hills of his ranch, Jonathan stood tall, knowing that today he had won more than a legal battle. He had won dignity, respect, and the attention of an audience that admired his courage. Jonathan's mornings no longer began peacefully. Each sunrise brought the stress of anticipating what the HOA might do next. Their first attempt at intimidation, sending legal notices and contractors to erect fences, had failed. But Jonathan knew they wouldn't stop there. He spent hours consulting property law books, local statutes, and even talking to former HOA members who had grown frustrated with the organization's heavy-handed tactics. Every day he uncovered loopholes, rules they ignored, and strategies to turn their own actions against them. Then came the day of the confrontation. A group of HOA board members, flanked by their lawyer, appeared at the gate Jonathan now controlled. They demanded immediate access, claiming legal authority. But Jonathan had anticipated this. Calmly, he told them, "You may have your papers, but you don't have the key. Access goes through me." The tension was palpable. The HOA officials exchanged glances, clearly caught off guard by Jonathan's preparation and composure. For the first time, they were the ones on the defensive. Jonathan invited them in, but on his terms. Every step they took was documented. Cameras captured every interaction. He asked questions they couldn't answer, pointed out the legal violations they had committed, and slowly, methodically, dismantled their arrogance piece by piece. Meanwhile, the local community began noticing. Neighbors whispered about the man who stood up to the HOA and refused to back down. Some cheered silently from their porches. Others were curious but hesitant to get involved. But Jonathan's courage sparked a ripple effect. As the days passed, more unusual things began happening. Social media posts started circulating, painting a picture of the HOA as an overreaching, aggressive organization. News outlets began to take interest. Jonathan's story was becoming bigger than the small rural community he lived in. But the HOA didn't give up. They escalated tactics. Letters became threats, legal filings multiplied, and a meeting was called that would decide the fate of Jonathan's property. This was no longer a personal battle. It had turned into a public spectacle. Jonathan prepared, not with anger, but with strategy. He gathered evidence, emails, videos, witness statements, even photographic proof of the fence being placed without proper notice. He knew this was his chance to not only protect his property, but to expose the hypocrisy and abuse of the HOA. The day of the meeting arrived. The HOA board sat across from him in a tense room, lawyers poised to attack. Jonathan remained calm, organized, and ready. He presented his case step by step, showing their violations, their unauthorized actions, and the legal loopholes they had ignored. For hours, the room was filled with tension. The HOA tried to intimidate, tried to twist the facts, but Jonathan had anticipated every move. Every argument they made was countered with evidence, logic, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. By the end of the meeting, the board was visibly frustrated. The lawyer, normally confident, stumbled under the weight of Jonathan's preparation. For the first time, they realized that Jonathan wasn't just defending a fence. He was defending principles, justice, and the respect every homeowner deserves. But the climax wasn't just in the meeting room. Outside, supporters gathered. Neighbors who had followed the story, local journalists, even random strangers who had read about Jonathan's fight online. They wanted to witness a man standing up for what's right. And Jonathan didn't disappoint. That night, Jonathan reflected on the journey so far. He had turned a threatening situation into an opportunity. He had transformed fear into action, uncertainty into strategy, and he realized something crucial. Power doesn't always lie with those who wield authority. It lies with those who understand their rights and refuse to be intimidated. Yet, despite his victories, Jonathan knew the battle wasn't completely over. The HOA was powerful, and there would be more attempts to undermine him. He had to remain vigilant, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Jonathan's story is more than a battle over property lines. It's a story of resilience, intelligence, and the unwavering belief that standing up for what's right is worth every risk. His calm, strategic approach showed the world that even when the odds seem stacked against you, preparation and determination can turn the tide. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter of this incredible story. A chapter that would test Jonathan in ways nobody expected, and ultimately define him as a man who refused to be silenced, boxed in, or intimidated. Jonathan's days were now filled with endless strategizing. Every knock at the gate, every call from a lawyer, every note slipped under his door became a reminder that the HOA was relentless. But Jonathan had learned one thing. To win against an organization like this, he couldn't react emotionally. He had to think ahead, anticipate their moves, and stay 3 steps ahead at all times. The HOA, realizing their initial attempts had failed, tried to manipulate the community. Flyers appeared overnight, warning neighbors about Jonathan. Social media posts painted him as a troublemaker, a man who refused to follow the rules. Some neighbors were swayed, while others quietly expressed support. The community was divided, and Jonathan knew he needed to act carefully. He called a local town hall meeting, inviting residents, journalists, and legal experts to explain the situation from his perspective. Standing in front of the crowd, he didn't shout or accuse. Instead, he calmly presented the facts, showed the evidence, and explained exactly what the HOA had done: building a fence on his land without permission, ignoring local laws, and attempting to intimidate him into submission. The crowd was stunned. Many had assumed the HOA was always right. Now they saw proof that the rules had been twisted, that a man's rights had been violated. Slowly, support began to grow. Neighbors whispered, nodding, some even approaching him after the meeting to offer help. But the HOA wasn't done. They escalated their tactics further. Legal filings turned into threats of lawsuits. Letters turned into public warnings. Even subtle sabotage was attempted, with contractors showing up under false pretenses to claim the fence was unsafe or unauthorized. It was psychological warfare, and it was working on some fronts. Jonathan, however, refused to back down. He hired his own legal team, consisting of lawyers who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. Together, they analyzed every document, every law, every regulation. Every move the HOA made was met with a stronger, more prepared response. One day, the HOA attempted to block Jonathan's only access road, hoping to prevent him from entering his own property. Jonathan arrived just in time, recording the incident with multiple cameras. The HOA members were caught red-handed, their aggressive tactics documented in detail. This evidence would later prove crucial. Jonathan's story began spreading beyond his small community. Podcasts, online forums, and news outlets picked up the tale. People were captivated by his calm determination, his clever strategy, and his refusal to let intimidation dictate his actions. He became a symbol of everyday resistance, the man who wouldn't let power bully him. The turning point came when the HOA filed a formal complaint with the county. Jonathan's legal team was ready. They presented evidence of the unauthorized fence, documented intimidation and violations of property law. The county officials were shocked at the level of overreach. The HOA's credibility began to crumble. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued building relationships with his neighbors. He invited them to tour the property, showing that he had nothing to hide. They saw firsthand that his actions were justified, that the HOA had acted without proper authority, and that the only person protecting the land and the community's interest was Jonathan himself. As the weeks passed, the HOA's tactics became desperate. They tried smear campaigns, public intimidation, and even subtle harassment. But Jonathan's preparation, evidence, and growing support base made every move backfire. Each time they tried to intimidate, he responded calmly and strategically, turning the situation further in his favor. Jonathan's fight was no longer just personal. It had become a story of community, justice, and the power of standing up to those who abuse authority. It inspired others across the country who had faced similar struggles, reminding them that preparation, strategy, and courage can overcome even the most aggressive opposition. By now, Jonathan had become a master strategist. He understood every nuance of HOA regulations, legal loopholes, and community sentiment. Each day brought a new challenge, but he met them with the same calm, methodical approach that had carried him this far. And as he looked over the rolling hills of his property, the fence no longer symbolized oppression. It had become a battleground for justice, a monument to one man's refusal to be silenced, boxed in, or intimidated. The story of Jonathan and his fence was far from over. New challenges were on the horizon, each more complex than the last. But Jonathan knew one thing for certain: with determination, strategy, and the courage to stand up for what's right, he could face anything. Weeks of escalating tension had brought Jonathan to a critical point. The HOA was relentless, sending letters, lawyers, and even private investigators to intimidate him. But Jonathan had learned that every move they made could be used against them if documented properly. And he had done just that. Every interaction, every aggressive act, every legal misstep was recorded meticulously. The county scheduled a formal hearing, a showdown that would determine the fate of Jonathan's property. The HOA came armed with lawyers, contracts, and a carefully crafted narrative designed to make Jonathan appear reckless and non-compliant. But Jonathan had his own arsenal: evidence, witnesses, and an airtight legal strategy. The day of the hearing arrived. Jonathan walked into the room calmly, dressed in simple but confident attire. Cameras were rolling, reporters were present, and the HOA officials looked ready for battle. But Jonathan's calm demeanor unsettled them. He wasn't angry. He was prepared. The hearing began. The HOA presented their case with confidence, pointing to supposed violations, regulations, and authority they claimed justified their actions. They spoke with conviction, hoping to intimidate the hearing board and the audience. Jonathan listened patiently. Then, when it was his turn, he presented his case step by step. First, he outlined the factual timeline: how the HOA had built a fence without notice, ignored regulations, and attempted to manipulate neighbors. He then presented his evidence: videos, photographs, emails, and witness statements. Each piece meticulously countered the HOA's claims. The room was tense. Every word Jonathan spoke carried weight. His calm delivery, combined with undeniable proof, left the HOA scrambling to respond. Their lawyers tried to argue technicalities, but Jonathan had anticipated every loophole they might exploit. Midway through the hearing, the HOA attempted a dramatic move. They brought up a past incident, unrelated to the property dispute, hoping to cast doubt on Jonathan's character. But Jonathan had prepared for this too. With precision, he explained the context, provided supporting documents, and turned the narrative back on them, showing their attempt as a desperate distraction. The audience in the room shifted. Journalists took notes, neighbors whispered. Even some HOA board members exchanged nervous glances. Jonathan's meticulous preparation was winning the day. Hours passed. Arguments were made, evidence reviewed, and emotions ran high. The HOA, growing frustrated, tried to rush the hearing, hoping to intimidate Jonathan with time pressure. But he remained unshaken, countering each tactic calmly, confidently, and legally. Finally, the hearing board deliberated. Jonathan waited, his heart steady but his mind alert. He knew the outcome depended, not just on his evidence, but on his ability to communicate clearly, inspire trust, and expose the HOA's overreach. When the decision was announced, the room fell silent. The board ruled in favor of Jonathan. The HOA's fence was declared unauthorized, their actions unlawful, and any attempts to restrict access without his consent were invalid. Jonathan had won. But more than that, he had established a precedent for property rights, fairness, and accountability. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras captured Jonathan addressing the crowd, neighbors cheering, and journalists asking questions. He spoke not with arrogance, but with humility and a clear message. Standing up for what's right is not easy, but it is necessary. Social media exploded with his story. People across the country were inspired by his courage, strategy, and persistence. He became a symbol of resistance against overreach and injustice, a modern-day hero for everyday Americans facing bureaucratic tyranny. But the fight wasn't over. Even though the legal battle was won, Jonathan knew the HOA might try other subtle tactics. He remained vigilant, documenting every interaction and keeping a close watch on community sentiment. Preparation had been his secret weapon, and he wasn't about to abandon it. As the sun set over his reclaimed property, Jonathan looked over the fence that once symbolized oppression. Now it represented resilience, strategy, and the triumph of intelligence over intimidation. The journey had tested him mentally, emotionally, and strategically, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more respected than ever. Jonathan's story is more than a tale of a property dispute. It's a blueprint for standing up to power, a lesson in perseverance, and proof that courage, combined with strategy, can overcome even the most daunting challenges. And while the HOA may have thought they could control him, Jonathan had shown the country that true authority lies not in intimidation, but in knowledge, preparation, and the unwavering courage to fight for what is right. With the legal battle behind him, Jonathan began the process of restoring peace to his property. The fence that once represented oppression was removed, and his land returned to its original, open state. But Jonathan understood that the true victory wasn't the fence, it was the principle he had defended: fairness, justice, and the right to live without intimidation. Neighbors who had once been unsure or even skeptical now approached Jonathan with respect and admiration. Some apologized for believing the HOA's narrative. Others expressed gratitude for standing up in a way that made them feel safe to do the same. Jonathan had not only defended his own rights, but had empowered an entire community. The media continued to cover his story. Podcasts, YouTube channels, and news outlets highlighted the battle, emphasizing how one determined individual can stand against bureaucracy, intimidation, and overreach. Jonathan's calm, strategic approach became a model for others facing similar challenges across the country. But Jonathan didn't stop at victory. He began helping neighbors understand their rights, sharing strategies for dealing with overreaching authorities, and encouraging community members to document and defend their property and personal freedoms. His home became a hub for awareness, learning, and empowerment. The HOA, meanwhile, faced scrutiny. Their reputation suffered and their power within the community was challenged. They attempted minor retaliatory tactics, but the community support for Jonathan made these efforts largely ineffective. The organization, once seen as untouchable, had been held accountable. Jonathan also took time to reflect. The journey had tested him in ways he never anticipated, emotionally, mentally, and strategically. He realized that courage alone was not enough. Preparation, documentation, and a methodical approach were what truly made the difference. This lesson, he knew, was valuable not just for him, but for anyone facing injustice. As the seasons changed, Jonathan's property flourished. Rolling pastures, his barn, and the open sky became symbols of resilience. The story of the fence and the battle with the HOA became a legend in the community, a tale told to inspire future generations to stand firm in the face of intimidation. Jonathan's personal life also benefited. Friends and family who had watched the struggle unfold admired his tenacity and the calm wisdom with which he handled every challenge. The experience strengthened his relationships, built trust, and elevated his standing in the community. Social media buzzed with discussions about property rights, HOA abuses, and the importance of standing up for what's right. Jonathan's story became a case study, a teaching tool for legal experts, community organizers, and everyday citizens who wanted to protect their own homes and liberties. One day, during a quiet evening on his land, Jonathan reflected on the journey. The fence, the threats, the legal battles, all had tested him, but they had also taught him invaluable lessons. That knowledge is power, that documentation can turn the tide, and that courage combined with strategy can overcome even the most powerful opponents. Jonathan knew that his story wasn't just about a fence. It was about a man who refused to be silenced, a community that learned the value of truth, and the reminder that standing up for justice often requires patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. He looked out over the horizon, the wind rustling through the trees, the sun casting a golden glow on his land. It was a peaceful moment, hard-earned, and a testament to what can be achieved when one refuses to back down. Jonathan's story would live on, inspiring others to defend their rights, confront intimidation, and fight for fairness in their communities. It became more than a personal victory. It became a symbol, a beacon of hope for all those who face powerful, overreaching authorities. And while the fight had been long and arduous, Jonathan had proven a simple truth: standing up for what's right, with courage, strategy, and integrity, always leaves a lasting impact on your life, your community, and even the world around you.